Okay, so in this video I'm just going to have a quick look at why we get a negative number when we multiply a negative integer by a positive integer, and why we get a positive integer when we multiply a negative integer by a negative integer. So I'm just going to have a look at a couple of simple examples. Now I have done a more formal proof of this in a separate video. You could have a look at that, but this is kind of a simpler explanation as to why these happen. So let's have a look at, let's say, minus 2, a negative 2, and we're going to multiply that by a positive 3. Now we know that we should get a negative 6. We know that a negative times a positive will give us a negative, and 2 times 3 is 6. So why is this? Well, let's have a look at, let's take this negative 2 here, this minus 2. So we take minus 2 and add 2. So if we take away 2 and add 2, we end up at 0. So that will give us 0. So let's just extend that a little bit. Let's take negative 2 plus 2. We put a bracket around it, and we're going to multiply this by a positive 3. And we know that negative 2 plus 2 will give us 0. So this part here is just 0. And 0 times 3 will give us 0. Okay, now we can use the distributive property of multiplication over addition here to just work this out. So in other words, what we can do here is take this 3 here and multiply it by the negative 2. We can take this 3 here, multiply it by the positive 2, and add our two answers. That's the distributive property. So let's do that. So we're going to take 3 and we're going to multiply that by negative 2, plus we're going to take the 3 and we're going to multiply that by plus 2, and that should still give us 0. So let's just continue on then. Well, let's have a look at this. Here we have a positive 3 times a positive 2, so we know that 3 times 2 will give us 6, so this should give us a plus 6 here, and we still have our 0 here. So what should this be over here then? What should this bit here give us? Well, if we have a plus 6 here and we need to get a 0 on this side of the equation, this part here must be a negative 6. In other words, if we multiply 3 by minus 2, we should get minus 6, because that's the only way we can get a 0 here on the right. So we end up with a minus 6 if we multiply 3 by minus 2. So that's the first kind of reason why this actually works here. Let's have a look at two negatives then. If we just we'll have a look over here. So let's take same thing again, but let's take negative 2 and we're going to multiply that by a minus 3. Now again, we know that this should give us a plus 6. We know that a negative times a negative is a positive, and 2 times 3 is 6. But we'll use the same kind of argument that we used here to kind of prove this, or to show it, show that it works for these numbers, I should say. It's not an actual formal proof, if you like, but it's just to show that it does actually work. So let's take our minus. We'll take the minus 2 again. We'll go with the minus 2. So we're going to take minus 2 plus 2. Again, we know that that should give us 0. Okay, so let's multiply it by our minus 3 then. So we're going to take our minus 3 on the outside here, and we're going to take our minus 2 plus 2 here, and again that should give us 0 here, because minus 2 plus 2 is 0, and 0 times anything is just going to be 0. So 0 times minus 3 is just going to be 0. Okay, so let's just do again, we're just going to use the distributive property here. So we're going to multiply the minus 3 by minus 2. We're going to take the minus 3 and multiply it by plus 2. So let's have a look at that. So we're going to take our minus 3, we're going to multiply it by minus 2, put in our plus here. This is multiplication. This is we're distributing multiplication over addition here. So it's minus 3 times minus 2 plus our minus 3 times plus 2 here, and again this should give us 0. It's exactly the same as up here, so we still get 0. Okay, so we know from what we did over here that if we multiply a positive by a negative, or indeed because of the commutative property of multiplication, a negative times a positive, we will get a negative. So in other words, a negative times a positive should give us a negative. Or if we switch these around using the commutative property, we should also get a negative. So in other words, these two here should give us a negative 6. We know that from what we did over here. So these two here will give us a negative 6. And again, this is going to be equal to 0. So what should a minus 3 times a minus 2 give us? Well, in order for us to get a 0 here on this side, because we have a minus 6 here, these two multiplied should give us a plus 6. So this should be a plus 6 here. So plus 6 minus 6 will give us 0. So again, we've shown here that if we multiply two negatives here, we'll get a positive answer here. Okay, so that's it for this particular video.